Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jennifer Morse. I'm a product evangelist here at MadCap Software. We're going to spend the next hour together doing an overview of MadCap Flare. And today we're going to talk about topic-based authoring and single-source publishing with Flare. So we're going to explore some of the advantages of topic-based authoring over traditional authoring. We're going to showcase some of the rich single-sourcing capabilities of Flare. We're going to walk through the editor a little bit and talk about some of these features, and then we're actually going to generate some content and see what all of this looks like. So we have a lot to cover today, just a couple of housekeeping things. I want to make sure everybody can hear me and see my screen okay. You should see a welcome slide. There's a questions panel in the GoToWebinar console, so maybe just give us a hi sign and make sure that all is okay. Let us know if you have any issues there. We'll do our best to accommodate. Reminder, this webinar will be recorded, so if you have to pop out early, then we will send out a link to the recording as soon as it's done. We would also encourage you to ask questions. We have a lot to cover today, so we'll do our best to get to questions behind the scenes as we can, and if there's time at the end, I'll certainly address them. Whatever we don't get to, we'll follow up with a question and answer document along with the recording, so you have that to review. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and dive in since we have a lot to cover today. So first things first, there's three core reasons why folks consider using Flare. The first one's going to be content reuse. A lot of users have this issue of having the same procedure or policy in 15 different manuals, and users are tired of updating the same content across all of these different manuals when there's a change. So Flare addresses that. The next thing we talk about is what we call multi-channel publishing. So another benefit to Flare is that, okay, well maybe you've got 15 different manuals, and maybe it wasn't so much of a big deal if they were all delivered as one type of output, say PDF. But maybe now you have to take all of that content and maybe deliver it as a searchable and navigable online knowledge base, or maybe it has to be viewed on a mobile device, so it needs to be responsive. So that's the other problem that we solve. All of the content that you write can now be published to all of these different channels. And then the last thing is ease of use. So we want to make it easy for authors to write their content in a way that doesn't require them to be XML programmers to achieve all of this content reuse functionality. So those are the three core benefits that we bring to the table. So now in terms of that first one, that content reuse bullet that I mentioned, I want to do a quick comparison with something that's really familiar to most folks, which is Microsoft Word, and I like to use that as an example. So the challenge with Microsoft Word is that the very things that make it so easy for us to use are some of the things that get in the way in terms of content reuse. And that's because when we're working in Microsoft Word, we're actually doing three things at once. It's not something that we'll think about often because it's sort of become second nature. But what we're doing is we're writing all of our content. We're also embedding all of that formatting. We're also defining the overall scope of that document. And what do I mean by scope? Well, if I'm writing a training manual, it's always going to be a training manual. If you're writing an installation guide, it's always going to be an installation guide. So essentially what that document is gets baked right in. So as a result, there isn't a great content reuse model. So the typical content reuse model in Microsoft Word is that if you've got your original draft employee manual here in my example, and you need to make a derivative of that document or maybe a different version of it perhaps for a different type of employee, well then you have to do a save as and make some copies. And now we end up with two different versions that stem from the same source. So maybe 90% of them are identical. And for any kind of future edits, you need to make those edits in those common elements across both of them. And you know, with two, maybe it's not such a big deal. But let's say this content starts to change. Your manuals start to evolve. Your offices start to grow. And now you need to make versions of these employee manuals for lots of different countries or cities where policies or procedures may change. And that's where the big problem becomes. You get to a point where you have to actually keep a spreadsheet in terms of what you edited and map where that change may affect all of these different deliverables down the road. So we have to hand edit and hand touch all of these different manuals when we may need to make changes to these common bits. So we want to try to get away from that type of workflow. And if we distill down to the root cause of the problem here, as long as we're over here on the right-hand side of this diagram, where we're looking at all of these, the management manual for London and the management manual for Paris, for example, we're hand touching and hand editing our end deliverables, and that's where we get stuck in an inefficient workflow. So the whole idea of MadCap Flare and really content management in general is that we stay on the left side so that we're only touching our source material. We want to get to a place where procedure X only exists one time, and if we end up, living, even if that procedure is in 20 different outputs, that's okay. When it comes time to make an update or a change to that particular procedure, we only want to update it in one place. So how do we do this? Well, the three components that I talked about in Word, how we're doing all three things at once. We're writing, we're embedding the formatting, and we're defining the scope. Well, in Flare, we break that apart into three separate components. And I'll start with the content authoring part because there are some critical things that we do with the content in a content management world. So first, when we're authoring in Microsoft Word, it's known as linear-based authoring, right? You start at the very beginning of your document and you keep writing until the end. Flare doesn't work that way. We follow what's known as topic-based authoring. So we work on much more granular content, which we call topics. Now, when I show the next slide, sometimes folks panic a little bit, but please do not worry. What's important to know is that we're not doing anything different than we were in Word, really. If you think of that long policy and procedure manual written in Word, let's say it's made up of, it's a total of 6 chapters. Well, we've already got 6 granularity points built into that manual. But let's just look at Chapter 3. Maybe Chapter 3 has 2 procedures and 2 reference sections. So that's one more level of granularity. And that's really all we're doing. We're going to take those 2 procedures and those 2 reference sections that make up all of Chapter 3, and we're going to break them out as standalone files. And we call those files topics. So no real rule to how long a topic needs to be, but it should have an identifiable purpose, and it should be able to stand on its own. So if I want to make a PDF procedure manual that just includes those 2 procedures and those 2 reference topics that I've got highlighted up there, well, then I simply grab those topics, I stick them together like little Legos, and now I have my new document. At the same time, maybe I want to create a searchable and navigable online knowledge base that just has my procedures. Well, then I can grab just the procedure topics that I want, link them together, and publish them in an online output that maybe lives on an intranet site or perhaps a publicly facing website. So by modularizing our content like this, we're not adding any extra work. We're just adding more flexibility in how we can reuse all of this content. So making this change from a linear environment to a topic-based environment often does a lot of good for many of our users. But for some folks, we have to take it to the next level. Maybe that topic up there called About Users can't be used by everybody. So that needs to be customized a little bit. Maybe a certain audience can't see everything in that particular topic. Well, in Word, we would do a save as, and now we would have a copy of that topic for that new audience. And that puts us back into that inefficient workflow of hand touching and hand editing our deliverables. So in Flare, we take care of that with what we call single source publishing. So what is single source publishing? Well, one of those fancy industry terms that you may not ever hear again, but that's okay. In plain English, really what it means is if I have a version of my procedure for audience A and a special version of my procedure for audience B, and yet another variation for audience C, well, I'm not going to have 3 versions to maintain. I'm going to put all of my content into one procedure and let my software do the heavy lifting. So why is single sourcing a good thing? Well, it helps us reduce content duplication. As authors, we can be much more efficient and we can customize that single master topic. It also helps us reduce localization costs. So if any of you are translating your source material into many different languages, it can save you quite a bit of money. So what it ends up looking like, and this is a little bit of a simulation, is I would have my single procedure with all of my content. And the next thing I'm going to do is use what we call in Flare conditional tags. And we can also use things like variables and snippets, which we'll talk about. And we're going to add these conditional tags to make our content unique. So this opening paragraph up here, for example, let's say that's for audience A. That's for my enterprise customer base. So we're going to give that a special color code. We're going to tag it with this green color marker called a conditional tag. And that's for our enterprise customers. And that just says, hey, this information is special. So this second paragraph, Well, that's an alternate opening paragraph, and this time it's unique for audience B, maybe those who buy the standard version of our software. So it gets a different color code to let me know that it's special. Maybe these next 3 paragraphs are common to everybody, so I'm going to leave those bits alone. And perhaps this very last paragraph here, well, that's content that I only want to appear when we produce our PDF guides. But when we publish the manual for viewing on a browser or maybe a mobile phone, we don't want this information presented. So if content is unique for any reason at all, you can use one of these color markers, which we call conditional tags in Flare, to identify it. So this is great for the writer, but we can't give it to our customer or an employee with all of these funky looking color tags on here. So Flare is going to help us generate these custom deliverables. So in an XML workflow, these are called transforms, another fancy word which means take all of my XML content and make it something that people can actually use. So Flare has XSLT transforms for taking our files and turning them into these beautiful HTML5 sites. Flare has XSLFO transforms to generate PDFs, but honestly, a lot of folks don't care about all of that XML alphabet soup talk. Really, folks just want to make it work and they want it to look good. So we simplified the terminology in Flare, and we call these transforms publishing targets. And a publishing target is simply a recipe that tells Flare how to process these topics so that the deliverable is just what you want for a particular audience. So in Flare, I'll define my recipes or my targets. So we'll make one for audience A. This is for my enterprise customers. We're going to include everything marked as enterprise and exclude the standard and the print tags. So maybe I have another target that's just for my standard users of my product. I'm including all of those tags that I've marked as standard, and I'm excluding enterprise and print. And of course, all of those common bits will stay there. And maybe I have my print-based target. This is one of my recipes that's going to go straight to PDF, so we're going to include that print tag and exclude those elements that I don't want. So if content is unique for any reason, I can continue to create these targets, and really it becomes more of a publishing at will kind of scenario. So then I can use my software then to build these things. 3 different outputs will be produced with all of those elements that I've defined. So my first one just has those green bits, or the green tag and all of those common elements. The one that's going to run in my standard web browser has that red content and all of the common paragraphs. And here's my PDF guide, which just has those common elements in that blue content. So now the color codes that I'm showing here on this slide on the outputs, in real life they don't actually show up. I'm just showing that maybe just for just to get the point across that these elements stay, but they won't really show up in the real world. So those are some of the big picture concepts. If we bring it to more of a real world workflow, it's kind of a 3-step process. So the first thing we want to give the author the ability to do is leverage any existing content. And we have a number of importers in Flare so that you can take advantage of repurposing content that you've already got. Probably the biggies are going to be Microsoft Word. Maybe you have FrameMaker documents. We can bring in files from other tools such as AuthorIt, Doc2Help, RoboHelp. If you've got some old .chm files lying around, we can bring those in. So some options there to bring in some legacy content. And once we've done some of our imports or imported that content into an existing project and we get it into Flare, then we can go through and we can actually edit that content or create brand new content right from within the Flare editor. And we can start using things like some of those conditional markers that I touched on, those variables, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and other little single sourcing elements to make our information unique. And then in terms of output, we have lots of choices. Some of the biggies here for our print-based outputs, we can go to PDF, we can go to Microsoft Word, we can go back out to FrameMaker if need be. Our content can be published to web browser. We have support for responsive HTML5. We also have the old web help format available. So if for whatever reason you need to support content in browsers that are really old and don't support the newer HTML5 technology, then you can produce the older web help output as well. You can produce an EPUB output out of Flare, so if a book needs to actually be on the phone or the tablet, that's supported. Still have support for the good old .chm file for any of you creating help for Windows desktop applications, and then a couple other formats as well. We can go back out to DITA. and Eclipse Help, and then a few others. So that's kind of the overall workflow now. What I'd like to do is switch gears and bring up Flare and talk about what it looks like when we first log in, and we'll go through some of these features. So I'm going to switch gears and put my PowerPoint away here, and hopefully you can all see my screen. So when we first open Flare, this is what we see. Now, as a new user, I'd encourage you to kind of get familiar with this home page, because there's a lot of great resources here if you're a new user. So the first thing here in our home page, we give you quick access to our Getting Started guide. We also have a Getting Started video if you prefer to watch it. And we also give you a link to begin a tutorial. So this is like an unfinished project in Flare, and we give you steps to actually go through and add single sourcing elements, add content, and publish. So kind of a start to finish kind of tutorial to get you familiar with the interface. We also give you easy access to various help resources, so you can link right to the help system if you want. If you prefer to print things out, or if you want to look at it in a PDF format, we have a ton of PDF guides available and links to tutorials and also our user community. And then the last thing I want to draw your attention to is this templates section. So we've put in a lot of different types of project templates in Flare just to kind of get you going. So different purposes. We've got a knowledge-based template. We have one if you want to create more of an interactive slideshow kind of look and feel. Just strictly print-based templates, a combination of print and online. Again, these are just template projects. They have some topics in there with some content that you can replace. They've already got some styles baked in with some properties, but they're there just to kind of get you going, really just starting off points so that you can start with something and then perhaps customize it even further. And that's what we're going to do here in the demo. I've actually started this project using this top navigation and PDF advanced template. So I'm going to go ahead, and I've actually got it loaded here. And the next thing I want to draw your attention to are these two panes here over here on the left-hand side. We've got what we call our Content Explorer and our Project Organizer. The Content Explorer is where you're going to be quite a bit. This is where we keep our library of topics, or those little Lego bricks that I talked about in the beginning. The other thing that's going to be stored here are resource files that support those topics. So things like any images that you may want to use in your content, multimedia files, any videos that you want to include, our style sheet, so how we format all of our information is going to be stored here. And then in the Project Organizer, we can flip back over here, these control more of the project as a whole. So that recipe file that I talked about, that target file, is stored here. And so we're going to come back to this at the very end. So let's come back to the Content Explorer. If we want to start writing or editing any of our topics, we can double click on any of the topics in here, and it's actually, they'll just open up in our XML editor. So, oops, sorry about that. So we call it an XML editor, but the good news is you don't need to have to know how to even spell XML to use it, which is great. So we can author in this editor just like we would in Microsoft Word. We can start adding content here. We can just start typing. So maybe I'll say, here is my new content. And we can start typing things just like we would in Word. And let's see if I can type efficiently here while I have so many people watching me. And maybe we'll add one more step. So just like we would in Word, if I wanted to make this a numbered list, I can come up here, I can select my content, come up and select a numbered list, and now I've got a numbered list item. We can also do things like insert any kind of image or multimedia file. So there's a number of ways we can insert these types of files. I can right-click and right from the context menu, I have the option to insert any kind of image or multimedia. If I have access to an image here in my folder, I can go ahead and click and drag one over if I want, or I can simply come up to the Insert menu and choose Insert Image. And wherever my cursor is, we'll insert the image. Now, I can grab an image again that's already in my project, or I can browse out to any location and grab it. So maybe I'll come out here and grab an image off my desktop. And when we put it in, Flare is actually going to make a copy of that file for us so that we have it available in our project. And if it's a little bit too big, we can come down here and drag it over and make it a little bit smaller if we want. Same thing with multimedia. We support a number of multimedia formats. A lot of authors like to augment the written word with tutorials or little show me movies. So if you've got some of those, you can easily insert them. So you can put in Flash movies, window media player files, QuickTime movies. Mimic is our own tool that creates software simulations and tutorials. So if you want to use those kinds of tutorials, you can insert them easily here. You can also embed YouTube or Vimeo movies. So if something's out there on the web already that you want to use, you can just put in the URL of the YouTube video and embed it right into your topic. And again, we can resize it as well. So those are some of the features for editing that should feel somewhat familiar to you if you're used to using Microsoft Word or more of a simple editor. But there are some features in Flare that give us a little bit more power, that make it easy for us to achieve that single sourcing workflow and ensure we're reusing as much content as we can. So as authors, you can use elements like variables and snippets and those color-coded conditional markers that I talked about in the very beginning. So let's take a look at some of those. So let's talk about variables quickly. So if we take a look at this first line here, we can see that this word fiction soft is in brackets. And if we hover over it, we get a little bit of information. Flare actually tells us that that's a variable. It's not something I can click on and actually edit here in the editor. Well, what's a variable and why would I even consider using them? Well, in Flare, we can use variables for short strings of information that we need to use in our project over and over. And using variables as a placeholder for this text gives us a single place to define what that text needs to be. And we can define what that variable needs to be project-wide. So every time I insert this product name variable, it's going to say fiction soft. We can also override the definition of that variable in a specific target, so if it needs to change for any of our outputs. So variables are great for product names, version numbers, company names. If you're doing maybe documentation for any of your OEM partners and any little strings need to be rebranded for any kind of reason, any kind of short string of text that may change in the future, great to use a variable here. So if at the last minute, let's say you're documenting, maybe fiction soft is the code name for the software we're developing, and at the 11th hour, maybe marketing decides to change the name of that on you right before you're about to deliver. Well, now I don't have to go in and find every instance where I've hand-coded the word fiction soft. I can just open up my variable set, and I can change that. So here's that product name, and maybe marketing decides, we're not calling it fiction soft anymore, we're calling it fiction soft Pro. And when we hit save and come back to our topic, everywhere that variable is used, it's going to be updated. So it saves a lot of editing time. So variables are great for those short strings of text. But what if we have a chunk of content that needs to be used over and over again? Maybe you have a series of steps or styled admonitions like cautionary notes or warning notes, things that you use often. For this kind of content, we can use what we call a snippet. And a snippet is a chunk of content, again, that you can use in your topic or your projects over and over again. So snippets can be styled, they can contain images, they can contain tables, really anything that you would include in a topic, you can include in a snippet. I kind of like to think of them as little mini topics. And the major benefit of using a snippet is that we can insert them into our topics by reference. So let's open up another topic here. And maybe you've got a chunk of information here, like let's say this whole bit under this getting started, in this getting started topic, we're going to be using this quite a bit. So we can actually highlight this information, and right from our home menu, we can create a snippet. And Flare is going to ask us to give it a name, so maybe I'll call it Getting Started Steps. And by default, it's going to put it in that resources folder here on the left-hand side where it says snippets. But once it's there, you can move it anywhere you want. It's just by default, it puts us there for us. So we'll hit create, and then what Flare is going to do is going to replace that text with that snippet block. So I can't actually click in here and edit it because it's, again, being inserted here by reference. So maybe we want to use that in some other topic. We'll go back to our basic steps over here. And maybe in between here we want to use it. So if I want to use any one of my snippets, again, I have a couple different ways I can do it. I can open up that snippets folder and I can click and drag it right over to where I want to go. Or I can come up here and right in the XML toolbar I can insert my snippet. So here's that one I just added. And we'll click save. There it is. So there's that little bit of that chunk of information that's being inserted by reference. So maybe for whatever reason we need to change what that snippet says. All I need to do is come to that snippet file. Let's open it up here. And maybe for whatever reason, this very last bullet needs to be removed. So when I delete it, it's actually going to remove it. And everywhere that snippet is used, it's going to be updated. So we'll come back to getting started, and we'll see that that last bullet there is removed. So again, a great technique to make sure that if you're using chunks of information over and over again, don't keep writing it over and over again. Perhaps consider using a snippet so that you can update it in one place. So once we get a little bit more comfortable with the editor, there are some features that we can expose that help us understand a little bit more about the document structure and what we're looking at here. And one of the ways we can do that is to invoke what we call our XML structure bars. And the way you turn them on is right down here in the XML editor. You'll see it says toggle show blocks. And let me close some of these just to get cleaned up here. Let me turn this guy on. And when I click that, you'll see that we've got these structure bars that show up here on the left-hand side. This is actually patented technology. It's something that we're really proud of. And one of the cool things about these structure bars is it gives us an underlying view or a view of that underlying XML structure without contaminating our editing environment with a bunch of XML markup, which can be a little bit distracting. So I can come up here, I can see I've got an H1, I've got a paragraph item, here I've got an ordered list with some list items and an image. And what's great about these structure bars is, yeah, we can see what's going on at a structural level, but we can also manipulate this content at a structural level. So let's say, for example, one of these list items is in the wrong position. I can simply click and drag. Maybe step number 4 needs to be step number 2. Well, in Microsoft Word, you do your copy, you do your cut. Maybe you grab the wrong, a little bit too much, and you break your list, and now you're spending a lot of time fixing things. Here, I can simply click and drag my list item, and Flare is going to show me where I can legally drop this structurally. So I have that little blue arrow. So if I want step number 4 to be step number 2, when I let go, it puts it in the right spot. And all of my numbering is self-healing. So I'm not spending a lot of time banging on my Word style sheet to try and get all my numbering to work. So really handy for moving things around. So very simple list here. But imagine you have a very complex list, or maybe a table with a lot of rows and columns. You can click and drag those rows and columns around structurally, and you're not going to mess anything up. So that's kind of fun. We can also do some other fun things with these structure bars. They're really handy for when we want to apply things like conditional markers. So conditional markers, again, are those little color codes that allow us to make our topics unique. So let's say, for example, I want to apply a conditional marker to this particular item. I can right-click and invoke my conditions. And when you first start a Flare project, we give you some placeholder conditions to use, but you can create as many conditional tags as you want in Flare and give it your own color. So for this particular example, I'm just going to use what we have here in this template project. I'm going to say that this list item, this is for PDF only. I don't want it to show up for any of my online outputs, so I'll go ahead and give it that tag. And we actually get a little bit of an indication here. Sometimes it doesn't come through the GoToMeeting very well, but there's actually some red shading here on this list item to let me know that it's special. We can also apply conditional markers to things like images. So I can right-click on my image here, pull up my conditions, and give it a tag. So those are for big blocks of content. You can actually conditionalize down to the character level, or maybe you want to remove a particular word. So maybe I want to apply a condition to this word basic here. We'll do that as well. So we'll apply a condition to that word. So what I can do here is I can actually preview my topic now and take a look at some of these changes that I made. I don't have to build the whole project to actually see what some of these results look like, which is another handy feature of Flare. So if I want to preview what this looks like in my online output, I'll go ahead and hit that little preview button. And Flare is going to just process this topic for me. And we can see some things here which are a little bit different. So let's compare. So because we told it to remove the word basic, it's not showing up there in my first sentence. You'll see my image is removed since I told it to be removed for this particular target. And you'll also notice that step number 3 is removed. So the nice thing about Flare too is when we apply conditional markers to those list items, if any of those list items are removed, our numbering self-heals. We're not left with 1, 2, and 4. So everything works out in terms of our numbering, which is handy. Okay, so what I've been working in here in this XML editor, I've been working in what's called our web layout. So this is the one that starts off right when you load Flare. But you don't have to work in this mode. We also can toggle to a number of different layouts. So if I want to, if I prefer, I can switch to what's called our print layout mode. And it feels a little bit more Microsoft Word-ish. You can still edit and manipulate content this way. We still have access to our structure bars for moving things around. But this lets us view our topic a little bit differently. It lets us see how our topic flows and our page break behavior, are the margins that we've got set for our page templates. We can see the margins of our footer frames that we've created. So some folks like to work in this fashion, and so we give you that option. One thing you'll notice, hopefully you've noticed, is that the heading 1 here in this topic is an entirely different color than what it looked like in the web layout mode. That actually leads me to the next thing I want to talk about, and another key concept of Flare is how formatting of our content is controlled. So Flare uses cascading style sheets to control the formatting of all of our content. So these template projects have some style sheets in place. They have some style properties defined, as we can see. Things like heading size, the color of our fonts, table styles, bulleted lists. But again, they're just templates, so we can change them. So for example, in my basic steps here, maybe we decide, that the whole corporate color scheme has changed. All of our headings need to be an entirely different color. So what we could do is we could come in here and highlight it, come up to the local formatting toolbar here and change. But hopefully at this point some of you are cringing at that and saying, no, throw a flag on that play. And if you are, then well done. Because if we do that, we have to go through every single topic and manually highlight all of the H1s or any element we want to change and manually go through and do it. And then again, if those crazy folks up in marketing decide at the 11th hour we're changing our colors yet again, well, now we got to go through and manually make those changes, and that can take a lot of time. Rather than do it manually, we'd like to use a style sheet to control that behavior. So if I want to change what heading 1 looks like, I can get there a couple different ways. I can double click on my style sheet over here, which will open it up, or I can just right click on the element that I need to change and choose Edit Style Class. And this actually brings up our simplified style sheet editor, and what I like about that is it takes us right to the element that we need to change. We don't need to search for it. You can filter out all of the different styles. Right now it's just filtering on my heading styles just to make it easy. And if I want to change it and then I double click on it, I can actually change a lot of things about this H1. I can put a border around it. I can give it a background color. I can establish page break or auto numbering behavior, change the font. Do I want it underlined? Do I want it bold? All those fun things. But for this example, we'll just keep it simple. Let's just change the color to something else. Maybe we'll go ahead and make it purple so that it stands out. And when we click OK and save, and we come back to that, you'll notice that that H1 has changed. And every H1 in my project is now going to take on that purple color. So now that we've looked at that simplified view, we also have an advanced view of our style sheet, which I'm going to show quickly. And we call it the advanced view. And it's not advanced in that you have to know how to code anything, but it just gives us a different view of our properties, and we can actually do some really fun things. So I can switch to the advanced view simply by clicking on this button. We're still looking at our H1s. One of the things I love about the advanced view is that we can easily show the different style sheet mediums that we have in play, which is like a synchronized view of all of our mediums. And this is actually a new feature that we've added in Flare version 12. So what's a style sheet medium? Well, a style sheet medium is an alternate group of settings in our style sheet. So for example, you've got maybe a print medium and a default web medium. Maybe you want all of your fonts to be a certain color when we view things in a browser, but when we generate our print-based outputs, maybe all of our fonts need to be black because they're actually going to be printed and we don't want to use up any color ink. Well, we can maintain a single style sheet for our content and just adjust the settings for what's called our print medium. And one of the things we can do in Flare 12 now is load these different mediums that we have in play just to get that synchronized view. So in this example, this is that green color that we saw when we switched to the print layout mode. It's actually taking on the settings of our print medium. So if we decide we need it to be a different color, we can come up here and change it. Maybe we'll make it black. And when we click Save, all of those will be applied. So if I change my layout to print, I'll see that my H1s have now taken on that effect. So this kind of thing is supported for, whether we're looking at things online or in print. But in Flare version 12, we also made it easy to adjust what we call the settings for what we call media queries. And a media query is very much like this print medium here. It's an alternate group of settings in our style sheet. And the settings for these media queries automatically are used under certain conditions, generally when the screen size is reduced. So if you're writing content for, if responsiveness is important to you, meaning, your content needs to be viewed on a mobile device or a tablet, maybe style properties need to take on a different look and feel when we view things on that mobile device or that smaller screen size. Maybe our whole font needs to be smaller. So again, we've baked in these media queries for you so you don't have to program them. You can add additional ones if you want. But for example, I can load my mobile medium here, so I can set all of the properties I want in my style sheet for how things are going to look when viewed on a mobile device. And the great thing is in Flare, when we publish our responsive HTML5 output, there's nothing you need to program to make that work. It just happens automatically. If the screen size, if a smaller screen size is detected and you've adjusted those style properties, they're going to kick in once that reduced screen size is detected. It just happens automatically. All right, so we talked a little bit about styling and making those changes. In fact, let's do that, because when we view our output and we shrink our screen size down, we can take a look at that change. So maybe we'll make this a pretty teal color. So let's click Save. Okay, so we've been writing and editing content in Flare, but one of the things I talked about in the very beginning is giving folks the ability to leverage existing content. What if we need to repurpose some of that information we've already written, say in Microsoft Word? So Flare has the ability to import those kinds of files, and we'll go ahead and do an example of that now. So if I had a number of Word documents that I wanted to bring into this particular project for further reuse, I can come up to the Project tab, come to Import, and I can choose Microsoft Word documents. And that's going to actually start the Microsoft Word import wizard. So we're going to tell Flare to import this document or import my documents into this particular project. And when I click Next, now I have the opportunity to actually choose the Word docs I want to use. So I'll click the little green plus button. I have a number of Word docs that I can bring in here, so let's grab a couple of them here. And when we click Next, Flare is going to do a deep scan of these documents. It's going to look for everything it can extract. We want lists to stay lists, we want tables to stay tables, and we want as much as we can. This is a really important screen because this is what's going to allow us to take those long linear Word documents and break them up into individual topics. And the way Flare does that is by using our word styles. So here we can see that Flare looked at these Word docs, and these are the different word styles used in those collection of Word documents. So this is where we say, all right, every time you come to heading 1, I want you to break and create a new topic for me. Or every time you come to a heading 2, break and create a new topic for me. And what's great about this wizard is, let's say, all of you will know your Word documents, the best. Heading 1 is a natural place to choose to break because that's often a new thought or a new, topic in a Word world. So if I choose heading 1 and I click Finish, what Flare is going to do, every time it comes to a heading 1 in that collection of Word files, it's going to create a new topic. And I get a little bit of a preview here so I can see what I get. And if I scroll through this, I can kind of see, well, okay, this looks good from a content perspective, but it's kind of long. This looks more like, if I keep scrolling down here, it looks a bit more like a chapter instead of just an individual topic. So we can check it out. If for whatever reason we don't like the level of granularity that we see, we can click Cancel, and we can come back and actually do a little bit more. So maybe I want to add a little bit more granularity here in my breakpoints. I'm going to choose heading 2. Now you'll notice it says heading 1 and heading 2 down here. Well, some of those docs came from an entirely different department who used their own Word templates for styling. So we want to be able to reuse those, which we can accommodate. So we'll break on their heading 1 and heading 2s as well. And when I click Finish, I get another preview, and I can see I get a few more bits out of that import. I have a lot more topics here because we were creating a little bit more granularity. And this looks about right. This looks about the size of my topic, like it can stand alone. It doesn't need any supporting information. So I like what I see. I'm going to go ahead and click Accept. And what Flare does is it puts all of those files that we imported into a folder for us that we can use. One thing that can be somewhat confusing to new users when they start looking at Flare and all of their content in here is they look at that Content Explorer and they think, okay, well, that's great. Everything's stored here alphanumerically. That's not the order of things that I'd like to present to my customers? Well, again, the Content Explorer is just there to keep everything organized. We can move these files around. We can create additional folders for additional organization, but they're going to be stored as they would like on disk, like what you would see in Windows Explorer. They're stored here alphanumerically. So the topics that we deliver in an output and their order is actually maintained in our project organizer in what we call our TOC file. So TOC stands for Table of Contents, and I'll switch over here. And it really plays an important role. It controls the order and the topics that are actually going to be displayed in our output. It's what lets us stitch together whatever topics we want for any particular deliverable. And you may have multiple tables of contents per project because all of your deliverables may be unique and they all may have a slightly different order of topics. So that's why we can create multiple tables of contents in a project. So let's open up one of these here and take a look at what it looks like. So this is the one I'm going to use for again, this is just a template file, so we can rename it anything we want. It just happens to be named online output. And it acts much like you would see in a table of contents. These pages here can be moved around. We can click and drag them to different places. We can click and, it's more point and click and drag and drop. We can also use these handy little buttons up here in the editor. So if for whatever reason we need to move it up and down, we can. If there's a particular topic from our pool that we need to add to this table of contents, we can go ahead and grab it. So I'll go ahead and choose one of those topics that I just imported, and I'll add it here. So it's a way to design the actual order of our topics, so a little bit different than our Content Explorer. Okay, so let's tie some of these things together. We have all of our content. We have our order of topics. Let's actually build something. And this is where that target file or recipe that I mentioned earlier comes into play. So let's open up one of those target files and take a look. We'll switch back to our project organizer. And our targets or our recipes are just stored here in this targets folder. So I'll open up this online one. And let's take a look at this recipe. So it's going to open up for us in that target editor. And there's a few things. There's a lot of options here. And you may not even get to or need to adjust all of them, but there's a few key ones that I want to point out. The first is this general setting here, and this is what we're actually building. So the target file is telling us what we're actually going to be making. This is where we can choose any of those outputs. So we're going to take our files and make an HTML5 output. This is where we can actually tell the target file what order of topics or what table of contents we're going to use. So we'll go ahead and choose that online table of contents that we were just editing. Couple other things. So conditional markers. This is that gatekeeper that controls what we see or not see in this output. So in this particular target, I've got my conditional markers set. I'm including everything I've tagged as online, and I'm going to exclude everything I've marked as PDF only. Variables. So we touched on variables earlier. These are those little placeholders for text. I mentioned you can define your variables project-wide, but for any particular deliverable, you can overwrite their definition. So maybe we need to go back and change the name of the product in this particular output. So we'll call this, maybe it needs to say FictionSoft Enterprise. So we'll rename that particular definition. And maybe the company name needs to change from FictionSoft to something else. Maybe we'll call it MadCap Software. And then we'll click Save. So another thing I want to point out is publishing. This is another one that tends to confuse new users. Oftentimes new users will ask, well, what's the difference between building something and publishing something? Well, when we build, that's actually the act of taking all of our files and compiling it to an output. And we'll get a local copy that we can see and view and preview. Publishing is creating a place for those files to actually live. Maybe you need to take that content and publish it to a web server somewhere so that your customers can view it in a browser. Maybe it needs to live on a protected intranet site somewhere. Publishing is just the act of making it easy to take what you've built and publish it somewhere. So you can create a number of destinations for your output, and with a click of a button, automatically copy all those files to where they need to go. So let's go ahead and build our output here. And when we click the build button, Flare's going to start processing everything. And what's cool about the build is we've actually now moved it to the background. So as things are churning and building, we can continue to edit things. We can continue at making changes to our style sheet or writing in topics. We can also build additional outputs at the same time. So maybe I want to also take a look at one of these PDF targets here, and I'll build this guy. All right, so that HTML5 one is done. Let's take a look and see what that looks like here. And I'll drag it over because it's on my other monitor. All right, so this is what we build out of the box. This is called our top navigation output. Why do we call it top navigation? Well, in this particular output, it's something new that we developed a couple years ago. We moved the traditional navigation from the left-hand side that you would see in an online help file, and we moved the navigation to the top. So the table of contents that we built is up here. So here's that topic that I added in our table of contents, and we can browse around and start using this much like we would a regular table of contents. We wanted to make search much more prominent and a little bit more front and center. You know, we're all sort of in a Google world, and the first thing we like to do when we want to try and find something is search. So for example, if I wanted to try and search on something, I could. And what you get is sort of a Google-esque look and feel in terms of our results. So we've got the topic title here, we've got a little bit of a description. It even gives us the direction or the URL path to the file that we searched on. And you'll notice here that in the very top we've got this definition. This is an experience similar to when we do a Google search on a particular word. If you've ever noticed, sometimes you'll see the definition at the very top of your results. If you choose to create and include a glossary of terms in your project, which we have in this template project that we're working on, then that definition will appear at the very top of the results if it happens to be something that your user searches on. So if you document a lot of acronyms or, you know, really complex terms, a glossary is a great thing to include. And what's nice is that the search displays that glossary term at the very top of the search field. Let's go back to the home page for a quick second. I just want to point out a couple of other things. There's that variable override that we did right before we published. So we renamed it from FictionSoft Pro to FictionSoft Enterprise, and it actually picked it up here as well. If we scroll down to the very bottom, there was a variable down here in our footer, so it picked up the definition of that particular definition that we included. So if we shrink this down, you know, all of the HTML5 outputs that we produce out of Flare, they're responsive. So if we need to view this on a smaller screen, for example, if I shrink this down, a couple things you'll notice. Make this a little bit wider here. So let's say that looks about like a tablet size. You'll notice that our navigation went away, and we got this handy little hamburger menu here so that we can come through and navigate through our table of contents. Let's go ahead and look at that one topic. I think it was basic steps we can see. So if we shrink it down even further, you'll see that that stylistic property change. Remember, we made a stylistic change. So when we view things on a mobile device, or in this case a smaller screen size, some stylistic property changes kicked in. And in our case, we changed our heading text from black to this teal color. So it could be color, it can be size. But the point is that as our screen size is reduced, those style properties can kick in that we set. So let's go back and take a look at another one here. This is our top navigation output. We also have our tri-pane HTML5. So to save time, I actually have one up here that we've built. So this is an older Flare online help system for Flare version 10 actually, and this is what we call our tri-pane HTML5 output. So the table of contents is here on the left with that familiar expanding collapsing table of contents. I can still do my regular search, and everything shows up here in the right-hand side. So a little bit more traditional feeling. Also responsive. If I shrink this guy down, my menu changes to that handy little hamburger menu, so I can still navigate things on a tablet or a mobile device. So that's a look at some of the online outputs. I'm going to switch back to Flare here for just a minute because I think I want to take a look at that PDF that we built. So here's that PDF file, and I'm going to make it a little bit bigger so we can see. And I think I'll change my view to a single page, make it a little bit easier to navigate. So when we build our PDF file, that PDF target is also pulling in, again, same content, it's just pulling in our page templates that we created. Now in this particular project template, we've got a custom title page, we have a copyright page, our table of contents is dynamically built so we can see that this is actually linked. I mean, if we print this out, those pages are correct, it's going to direct us to the correct page. But if we're viewing it online, it's also linked. So if, for example, I want to come over here and come to cross-references, I can. One thing I want to point out when we're talking about online and print, and this is actually helpful because this topic talks about it here, if you're writing for an online and a print-based world, Flare has support for what we call cross-references, and I highly encourage you to consider using cross-references if you're writing for this hybrid world. So a cross-reference is kind of like a hyperlink on steroids. If you're writing and you're directing someone to perhaps an entirely different topic in the help system like we've got here, you may reference them or refer them to some other topic. If it's just a regular old hyperlink, it's going to look like a blue underlined term. And if we're actually holding the page in our hand, a blue underlined term doesn't do anybody any good. So when we use cross-references in Flare, they behave like regular hyperlinks online, but they also resolve to proper page cross-references. So if we printed this thing out, we'd be directed to the proper page. In fact, if we look at this same topic in our online output, we can see it's going to act like a regular hyperlink here. So if I go to my links, and we'll go to links and footnotes, here's that same sentence, but this is how it behaves when we're viewing it online. So cross-references, really powerful if you're going to both print and online. Would encourage you guys to use that. So that responsiveness is right out of the box. It's nothing that you have to program. We have a skin editor built into Flare that lets you customize your skins and use your own colors and logos and buttons. Obviously, this kind of stuff is placeholder information. Same with those page templates. The one that I built has, let me pull it up here. The one that I built has a page template, already built, with a certain kind of header and footer information, but they're completely customizable. In fact, what I'd like to do before we kind of wrap up here, I want to bring your attention to our showcase page. Let me switch gears and pull up our some of these examples. The showcase page is fun because, when we see externally facing content that other folks are doing with Flare, we like to put it there because it's a great way to see how other companies customize the output. What can you actually do with this information? So here's an example of a company that's using Flare to produce a tri-pane HTML5. So they've customized and branded their skin with their own colors and logos. They've customized the open and closed books for the table of contents here. Here's a really good looking one from a company called X Matters up in Northern California. So they've customized a top nav skin to really brand it and make it look like their own site. And you can navigate through all of the topics here on the top. Another thing I want to point out is PDF files. So there's some really cool looking examples of what you can do with Flare from a PDF standpoint. Here's Vodafone. Some of you may have heard of this company. So they've created a custom template file for their PDF files, and it looks really cool, really branded to the company. And I also wanted to bring up this one from Ectron. And I bring this up because it's a good example of how scalable the content can be in Flare. This is a PDF file that happens to be almost 2,500 pages long. So there's really no limit to how small or large your output can be. Flare can handle it. And if you wanted to take a look at more samples, then I'd encourage you to come up to our website. And you can access that showcase page. Here I'm on the Flare page of our website, and you just access it right here where it says Customer Showcase. And you have access to lots of different externally facing examples, both the top navigation type look and feel. We've got some examples down here for that tri-pane output. And if you keep scrolling down, there's lots of additional HTML5 and print-based samples. So just a nice, nifty way to see some different ways of presenting information generated out of Flare. All right, so we've covered a lot here. I'm going to just switch back to PowerPoint here quickly. So before we I'm going to take a quick look. We have a little bit of time left, just a few minutes, but I just want to remind everybody, this was a real high-level webinar. We covered a lot of things, but if you want to take some of those CSS concepts and some of these single sourcing concepts a little bit further and increase your skills a bit, I'd encourage you to check out these two upcoming training courses that we have in September. These are live and instructor-led web-based courses that span 2 days, 2 half days online. And as an attendee, you actually get $100 off each of these courses. So the outlines for these courses and all the modules that we cover are available on our website. If you have any questions about these classes, any questions about registering or anything at all, please contact the sales team, contact your sales rep, or feel free to drop me a line as well. I'm happy to help. All All right, so we have a few minutes left. I'm just going to take a look here and see if we have any questions. And let me pull up the questions panel here. Forgive me while I figure out how GoToWebinar works. Let me just take a look here. Oh, here's a question. So is your CSS training for beginners or advanced users? So that's a great question. I would say it's a really tricky one to answer. There's actually an outline of all of the modules that we cover in that CSS training class on our website, and I'd encourage you to go check it out. In fact, we can send a link to that to everybody. So you can see kind of a sense of the modules. I think some knowledge of CSS is good, you know, just maybe some of the concepts that we talked about here in this webinar, you know, knowing that our content is actually referencing a style sheet and that style sheet's controlling some of the formatting. You don't have to know how to code CSS in order to take that class, but even if you're a beginner, you'll get a lot of benefit out of that just to get some familiarity with some of the powerful concepts of CSS. Let's see, a couple other questions here. Where are all the files stored, on our servers or yours? Good question. So when we create projects or content in Flare, at this time, all of the content that you create is on your end. We don't host any of your project files or your output. And in fact, I'll kind of segue into another thing is that when you create your content in Flare and all of your project files, you can store your Flare project files local on your desktop. You can also choose to store them in a source control repository. Again, you're still hosting and managing it, but source control offers writers a lot of benefits. Now, we don't make a source control tool. There are so many great source control tools out there on the market, so we just decided to plug into what everybody uses. So you can bind your Flare projects to really any source control tool you want, and take advantage of all of the benefits that source control can offer in terms of rollback capabilities, you know, an audit trail, a history. So content is still stored on your cloud, not on ours, but you can still bind it to a source control repository for even greater control and content management capabilities. Okay, so a little bit more time here. Let me look and see if we can get another question in. So let me look here. Boy, lots of questions that are getting answered here behind the scenes. So what we're going to do is this. We're going to go ahead and compile some of these ones that we don't have time to get to today, and we're going to go ahead and send out a question and answer document for everybody. We'll keep this open for just a little bit longer in case you want to pop in a couple more questions, but if you think of something that you didn't get a chance to ask after the webinar is over, feel free to drop me a line, put my email up there, email address up there for everybody to access. Love to hear from you. Also would love to hear from you if you have any ideas for any future webinars, any subject matter you'd like to see down the road. Please let us know. We'd love to get something scheduled. So with that, I want to thank everybody for coming. I really hope this was helpful. I know we covered a lot in the 60 minutes, and we hope to see you in a future webinar, and I wish you all a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you so much.